A filibuster is a political procedure where one or more members of Parliament or Congress debate over a proposed piece of legislation so as to delay or entirely prevent a decision being made on the proposal. It is sometimes referred to as talking the bill to death or talking out a bill, and is characterized as a form of obstruction in a legislature or other decision-making body. This form of political obstruction reaches as far back as ancient Rome times, and could also be referred to synonymously as political stonewalling. Due to often extreme lengths of time required for a successful filibuster, many speakers stray off topic after exhausting the original subject matter. Past speakers have read through laws from different states, recited speeches, and even read from cookbooks and phone books. The word filibuster comes from the Spanish filibote, English flyboat, a small, swift-sailing vessel with a large mainsail, which enabled buccaneers to pursue merchantmen in the open sea and escape when pursued. The Oxford English Dictionary finds its only known use in early modern English in a 1587 book describing filibusters who robbed supply convoys. The English filibuster was borrowed from Spanish in the 19th century. Originally, it applied to pirates infesting the Spanish-American coasts, but around 1850 it designated the followers of William Walker and Narciso Lopez, who were then pillaging former Spanish colonies in Central America. The word entered American political slang with the meaning to delay legislation by dilatory motions or other artifices. One of the first known practitioners of the filibuster was the Roman senator Cato the Younger. In debates over legislation he especially opposed, Cato would often obstruct the measure by speaking continuously until nightfall, as the Roman Senate had a rule requiring all businesses to conclude by dusk. Cato's purposely long-winded speeches were an effective device to forestall a vote. Cato attempted to use the filibuster at least twice to frustrate the political objectives of Julius Caesar. The first incident occurred during the summer of 60 BCE, when Caesar was returning home from his proprietorship in Hispania Ulterior. Caesar, by virtue of his military victories over the raiders and bandits in Hispania, had been awarded a triumph by the Senate. Having recently turned 40, Caesar had also become eligible to stand for consul. He was posed a dilemma. Roman generals honored with a triumph were not allowed to enter the city prior to the ceremony, but candidates for the consulship were required by law to appear in person at the forum. The date of the election, which had already been set, made it impossible to Caesar to stand unless he crossed the Pomerium and gave up the right to his triumph. Caesar petitioned the Senate to stand in absentia, but Cato employed a filibuster to block the proposal. Faced with a choice between a triumph and a consulship, Caesar chose the consulship and entered the city. Cato made use of a filibuster again in 59 BCE in response to a land reform bill sponsored by Caesar, who was then consul. When it was Cato's time to speak during the debates, he began one of his characteristically long-winded speeches. Caesar, who needed to pass the bill before his co-consul, Marcus Calpurnius Bibulus, took possession of the fasces at the end of the month, immediately recognized Cato's intent, and ordered the lictors to jail him for the rest of the day. The move was unpopular with many senators, and Caesar, realizing his mistake, soon ordered Cato's release. The day was wasted without the Senate ever getting to vote on a motion supporting the bill, but Caesar eventually circumvented Cato's opposition by taking the measure to the tribal assembly, where it passed. In the Parliament of the United Kingdom, a bill defeated by a filibustering maneuver may be said to have been talked out. procedures of the House of Commons require that members cover only points germane to the topic under consideration or the debate underway was speaking. Example filibusters in the Commons and Lords include, in 1874, Joseph Gillis Becker started making long speeches in the House of Commons to delay the passage of Irish coercion acts. Charles Stewart Parnell, a young Irish nationalist member of Parliament, who in 1880 became leader of the Irish Parliamentary Party, joined him in this tactic to obstruct the business of the House and forced the Liberals and Conservatives to negotiate with him and his party. The tactic was enormously successful, and Parnell and his MPs succeeded, for a time, in forcing Parliament to take the Irish question of return to self-government seriously. In 1983, Labour MP John Golding talked for over 11 hours during an all-night sitting at the committee stage of the British Telecommunications Bill. However, as this was at a standing committee and not in the Commons chamber, he was also able to take breaks to eat. On July 3, 1998, Labour MP Michael Foster's Wild Mammals bill was blocked in Parliament by opposition filibustering. In January 2000, filibustering directed by Conservative MPs to oppose the disqualifications bill led to the cancellation of the day's parliamentary business on Prime Minister Tony Blair's 1,000th day in office. However, since this business included Prime Minister's questions, William Hague, Conservative leader at that time, was also deprived of the opportunity of a high-profile confrontation with the Prime Minister. On Friday 20th, April 2007, a private member's bill aimed at exempting members of Parliament from the Freedom of Information Act was talked out by a collection of MPs led by Liberal Democrats Simon Hughes and Norman Baker, who debated for 5 hours, therefore running out of time for the parliamentary day and sending the bill to the bottom of the stack. However, since there was no other private members' bills to debate, it was resurrected the following Monday. In January 2011, Labour peers, including most notably John Prescott, were attempting to delay the passage of the Parliamentary Voting System and Constituencies Bill 2010 until after 16th of February, the deadline given by the Electoral Commission to allow the referendum on the alternative vote to take place on the 5th of May. On the 8th day of the debate, staff in the House of Lords set up camp beds and refreshments to allow peers to rest. In January 2012, Conservative and Scottish National Party MPs used filibustering to successfully block the Daylight Savings Bill 2010 to 2012, a private member's bill that would put the UK on Central European time. The filibustering included an attempt by Jacob Rees-Mogg to amend the bill to give the county of Somerset its own time zone, 15 minutes behind London. In November 2014, Conservative MPs Philip Davies and Christopher Chope successfully filibustered a private member's bill that would prohibit retaliatory evictions. Davies' speech was curtailed by Deputy Speaker Dawn Primarlo for disregarding her authority after she ordered Davies to wrap up his hour-long speech. A closure motion moved by the government, which was agreed to 60-0, failed due to being in court. In October 2016, Conservative Minister Sam Gyimah filibustered a bill sponsored by John Nicholson of the Scottish National Party that would pardon historic convictions of homosexual activity, which is no longer an offense, replacing an existing law that requires each pardon to be applied for separately. In October 2016, the Members' Bill of Labour's Julie Cooper MP, which exempt carers from having to pay hospital car parking charges, received its first reading on 24th of June. At the second reading in October, it was talked out in a filibuster by the Conservative MP Philip Davies. The all-time Commons record for non-stop speaking, 6 hours, was set by Henry Brougham in 1828, though this was not a filibuster. The 21st century record was set on December 2nd, 2005, by Andrew Dismore, Labour MP for Hendon. Dismore spoke for 3 hours and 17 minutes to block a Conservative private member's bill, the Criminal Law Amendment Protection of Property Bill, which he had claimed amounted to vigilante law. Though Dismore is credited with speaking for 197 minutes, he's regularly accepted interventions from other MPs who wish to comment on points made in the speech. Taking multiple interventions artificially inflates the duration of a speech and thus may be used as a tactic to prolong a speech. In location unitary authorities of England, a motion may be carried into closure by filibustering. This results in any additional motions receiving less time for debate by councillors. In location unitary authorities of England, a motion may be carried into closure by filibustering. This results in any additional motions receiving less time for debate by councillors instead of forcing a vote by the council under closure rules. A notable filibuster took place in the Northern Ireland House of Commons in 1936, when Tommy Henderson, independent unionist MP for Shankill, spoke for 9.5 hours, ending just before 4 a.m. on the appropriation bill. As this bill applied to government spending to all departments, almost any topic was relevant to the debate, and Henderson used the opportunity to list all of his criticisms of the unionist government. Both houses of the Australian Parliament have strictly enforced rules on how long members may speak, so filibusters are generally not possible, though this is not the case in some state legislatures. In opposition, Tony Abbott's Liberal National Coalition used suspension of standing orders in 2012 for the purposes of filibustering, most commonly during question time against the Labour government. In August 2000, New Zealand opposition parties National and ACT delayed the voting for Employment Relations Bill by voting slowly, and in some cases in Maori, which required translation into English. In 2009, several parties staged a filibuster of the local government bill in opposition to the government setting up a new Auckland council under urgency and without debate or review by select committee, by proposing thousands of wrecking amendments and voting in Maori as each amendment had to be voted on and votes in Maori translated into English. Amendments included renaming the Auckland Council to Auckland Catch-a-Fire Council or Rodney Hyde Memorial Council, and replacing the phrase powers of a regional council with power and muscle. The Rajya Sabha, which is the upper house in the Indian bicameral legislature, allows for a debate to be brought to a close with a simple majority decision of the House on a closure motion so introduced by any member. On the other hand, the Lok Sabha, Council of the People, the lower house, leaves the closure of the debate to the discretion of the Speaker once a motion to end the debate is moved by a member. In 2014, Irish Justice Minister Alan Shatter performed a filibuster. He was perceived to drone on, and hence this was termed a drone attack. A dramatic example of filibustering in the House of Commons of Canada took place between Thursday, June 23, 2011, and Saturday, June 25, 2011. In an attempt to prevent the passing of Bill 6C, which would have legislated the imposing of a 4-year contract and pay conditions on the locked-out Canada Post workers, the New Democratic Party led a filibustering session which lasted for 58 hours. The NDP argued that the legislation in its then form undermined the collective bargaining. Specifically, the NDP opposed the salary provisions and the form of binding arbitration outlined in the bill. The House was supposed to break for the summer, Thursday, June 23rd, but remained open in an extended session due to the filibuster. The 103 NDP MPs had been taking it in to deliver 20-minute speeches, plus 10 minutes of questions and comments. In order to delay the passing of the bill, MPs are allowed to give such speeches each time a vote takes place, and many votes were needed before the bill could be passed. As the Conservative Party of Canada held a majority in the House, the bill passed. This was the longest filibuster since the 1999 Reform Party of Canada filibuster on Native Treaty issues in British Columbia. Conservative Member of Parliament Tom Lukicki is known for his ability to stall parliamentary committee business by filibustering. One such example occurred on October 26, 2006, when he spoke for almost 120 minutes to prevent the House of Commons of Canada Standing Committee on Environment and Sustainable Development from studying a private member's bill to implement the Kyoto Accord. He also spoke for about 6 hours on February 5, 2008, and February 7, 2008, at the House of Commons of Canada Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs, meetings to block inquiry into allegations that the Conservative Party spent over the maximum allowable campaign limits during the 2006 election. Another example of filibuster in Canada federally came in early 2014 when NDP MP and Deputy Leader David Christopherson filibustered the government's Bill C-23, the Fair Elections Act, at the Procedure and House Affairs Committee. His filibuster lasted several meetings, the last of which he spoke for over 8 hours, and was done to support his own motion to hold cross-country hearings on the bill, so MPs could hear what the Canadian public thought of the bill. In the end, given that the Conservative government had a majority at the committee, his motion was defeated and the bill passed, although with significant amendment. The legislature of the province of Ontario has witnessed several significant filibusters, although there are two notable. The legislature of the province of Ontario has witnessed several significant filibusters, although two are notable for the unusual manner by which they were undertaken. The first was an effort on May 6, 1991, by Mike Harris, later Premier, but then leader of the opposition Progressive Conservatives, to derail the implementation of the budget tabled by the NDP government under Premier Bob Rae. The tactic involved introduction of Bill 95, the title of which contained the names of every lake, river, and stream in the province. Between the reading of the title by the proposing MPP and the subsequent obligatory reading of the title by the clerk of the chamber, This filibuster occupied the entirety of the day's session until it adjourned. To prevent this particular tactic from being used again, changes were eventually made to the standing orders to limit the time allocated each day to the introduction of bills to 30 minutes. A second high-profile and uniquely implemented filibuster in the Ontario legislature occurred in April 1997, where the Ontario New Democratic Party, then in opposition, tried to prevent the governing Progressive Conservative Bills 103 from taking effect. To protest the Tory government's legislation that would amalgamate the municipalities of Metro Toronto into the megacity of Toronto, the small NDP caucus introduced 11,500 amendments to the megacity bill, created on computers with the mail merge functionality. Each amendment would name a street in the proposed city and provide that public hearings be held into the megacity with residents of the street invited to participate. The Ontario Liberal Party also joined the filibuster with a smaller series of amendments. A typical Liberal amendment would give a historical designation to a named street. The NDP then added another series of over 700 amendments, each proposing a different date for the bill to come into force. The filibuster began on April 2nd with the Abbeywood Trail Amendment and occupied the legislature day and night, the members alternating in shifts. On April 4th, exhausted and often sleepy government members inadvertently let one of the NDP amendments pass, and the handful of residents on the Caffin Court in Etobicoke were granted the right to a public consultation on the bill, although the government subsequently nullified this with an amendment of its own. On April 6th, with the alphabetical list of the streets barely into the E's, Speaker Chris Stockwell ruled that there was no need for the 220 words identical in each amendment to be read aloud each time, only the street name. With a vote still needed on each amendment, Zora Street was not reached until April 8th. The Liberal amendments were then voted down one by one, eventually using a familiar abbreviated process, and the filibuster finally ended on April 11th. An ironic example of filibustering occurred when the Liberal Party of Newfoundland and Labrador reportedly had nothing else to do in the House of Assembly and debated between only themselves about their own budget after both the Conservative and New Democratic parties indicated either their support for the bill or intent to vote. On 28th of October, 1897, Dr. Otto Letcher, delegate for the Brunn, spoke continuously for 12 hours before the House of Delegates of the Imperial Council of Austria to block an action on the Ausgleich with Hungary, which was due for renewal. Mark Twain was present and described the speech and the political context in his essay, Stirring Times in Austria. In the Southern Rhodesia Legislative Assembly, independent member Dr. Arne Paley staged a similar filibuster against the Law and Order Maintenance Bill on 22nd of November 1960. Although this took the form of moving a long series of amendments to the bill, and therefore consisted of multiple individual speeches interspersed with comments from other members, Paley kept the assembly sitting from 8 p.m. to 12:30 p.m. the following day. In the Senate of the Philippines, Rosaler Lim of the Nacionalista Party held out the longest filibuster in Philippine Senate history. On the election for the President of the Senate of the Philippines in April 1963, he stood on the podium for more than 18 hours to wait for party mate Alejandro Almendras, who was to arrive from the United States. The Nacionalistas, who who comprised exactly half of the Senate, wanted to prevent the election of Ferdinand Marcos to the Senate presidency. Prohibited from even going to the comfort room, he had to relieve himself in his pants until Almendra's arrival. He voted for party mate Eulogio Rodriguez just as Almendra's arrived and had to be carried off via stretcher out of the sessions hall due to exhaustion. However, Almendra's voted for Marcos, and the latter wrestled the Senate presidency from the Nacionalistas after more than a decade of control. On December 16, 2010, Werner Kogler of the Austrian Green Party gave his speech before the budget committees, criticizing the failings of the budget and government parties in the last years. The filibuster lasted for 12 hours and 42 minutes, starting at 13:18 and speaking until 2 in the morning, thus breaking the previous record held by his party colleague Madeleine Petrovich, 10 hours and 35 minutes, on March 11, 1993, after which the standing orders had been changed, so speaking time was limited to 20 minutes. However, it didn't keep Kogler from giving his speech.